And hello and welcome to a special Father's Day edition of the Grow Your Business Today program. I'm your host, Darswell Rogers, and for this edition, I have invited two of my closest friends to join me. And I want to, before I introduce them, I want to explain the genesis for me deciding I wanted to have a special Father's Day edition. I was having a conversation recently with a person who's very close to me, and she shared with me that she had recently had a conversation with her mom and her two kids. And in that conversation, they all talked about the fact that they had not had a father that was actively involved in their lives growing up. And at that time, I thought, wow, that's just I began to reflect. In simple terms, I began to reflect on my life and began to realize and appreciate the good fortune that I had had to have had my dad in my life my entire life. And then I began to reflect on the fact that I have a son, and the fact I have been very active, and it has been actually one of the more enriching parts of my life. And so, as a expression of gratitude for fatherhood, I wanted to just invite a couple of good friends of mine to talk about their dads, and if they want their granddads. They both happen to be fathers that have had you know significant interactions, have spent and invested that time in their kids. And so, with that as a basic backdrop, let me introduce the two friends that I've invited. Lyle Harris, he is the senior director for the transit agency in Atlanta, which we know as Marta. And Greg Dulan, he's the CEO and owner of Dulan's on Crenshaw. He's also co-owner of Hotville Chicken and Dulan Soul Food restaurants in Los Angeles. And so, gentlemen, first off, because this was a very short notice request I made of you all to join me today. And so, thank you for the opportunity and for agreeing to join me this morning.
My pleasure. Thank you for having us.
So here's what I want to do. I'm going to ask you all some questions. I'm going to answer these questions as well, but I want to hear your responses first. And so I'm going to start with you, then Greg, and then I'll respond. And let me just frame, all of our dads are deceased, okay? And so I want to share with that, but start, if you would, with telling a little bit about your dads, okay? Where are they, and just by way of example, where were they born, their siblings, what kind of careers did they have, what challenges did they experience, to what extent did you really understand and appreciate the dynamics that your fathers went through in terms of just their lives. So let's start with you, Lyle, and then Greg. Talk a little bit about your dad.
So thank you, Darswell, again. And I could go on for hours and hours, but I'll try to keep it short about my dad. His name was Vincent Grover Hoffman, even though my last name is Harris. There's a story behind the fact that that the name I've carried my whole life is actually not my family name. I'll tell you a little bit about that. But my father was a Jamaican immigrant born in 1922 in Jamaica, West Indies, at a place called Holland Bay, a little tiny fishing village that I've never visited or had an opportunity to see myself. But he was sort of passed around. His birth mother didn't really raise him. He was raised by some grandmothers and some aunts and some other family members, which was pretty typical for many West Indian families at the time. And he was sort of passed around and sort of grew up a little rough and tumble, kind of a street kid. And then he wound up joining the Royal Air Force when he was in about 17 years old. Worked there for worked in the Royal Air Force as part of the part of a ground crew for several years. He just did not have a lot of close family. He was raised by his grandmother and his aunts, but he didn't have a lot of family growing up. And he wound up moving to the United States under an assumed name. He was born Hoffman, but he actually snuck into the country under the name Harris after he finished his service in the Royal Air Force. He came to the United States, to New York, like a lot of West Indian immigrants, and he met his wife, the woman who would later become his wife, my mom, Joyce Harris, at a dance club, which was also always a part of his life. He was always into dancing and socializing. They met and got married. Short time later, had my sister and me. And I had a brother who passed away before I was born, Dwayne. God bless his soul. But we grew up in Brooklyn, New York. My father was a printer who worked for a lot of different newspapers in New York at the time, New York Daily News, the New York Times, the New York Post, and he did that for most, if not all of his career. And what was interesting to me about my dad, and we can talk about this a little bit more later, he did not really have a role model. He did not have a template. He didn't have anyone to show him how to be a father. And what I remember most about him, he was not a very talkative guy, at least not around me, but he was always present. He was always there. He always showed up for my events and for my activities. He took me to the Boy Scouts. That was one of my earliest and most favorite memories. Is he used to take me to the Boy Scout meetings, and he never became a scout leader or anything like that. He was just wasn't that kind of dude, but he was present. He was always there. He used to take me for a cheeseburger and vanilla milkshake, after the Boy Scout meetings. And to this day, that's still my favorite meal in the whole wide world, is a cheeseburger and a milkshake. And not that I can afford it in my gut right now, but he was just a stand-up dude who understood his responsibilities and his obligations, even though he didn't have anyone to show him the kind of love that he showed me and my sister Gail as we were growing up in New York. And he ultimately eventually retired to Florida with my mom after 56 years of marriage. She died about 13 years ago. But he lived a very long and full life, and I'm so proud of him and honor him today. In fact, I'll end with this. I asked Darswell what I should wear for this interview, this discussion today, and he said to put on a shirt, because I was just wearing a t-shirt or a white beater. But I'm actually wearing a shirt, this white shirt from Arrow back in the day, that my father, he used to wear. He was a metrosexual before there was a term like that. And also, I'm going to do some product placement here, some plugs. This is a fedora that my dad used to wear all the time back in the day, when men used to wear hats to go out just to get a newspaper at the corner. But he was just a great guy. He was a great man, and I really honor and respect him. He's helped change me and shape me not only as a man, but as a father to my twins, Jason and Nadia. So with that, I mean, there's plenty more to talk about. Like I said, I could go on and on and on, and I will a little later, but I want to give Greg a little chance to talk about his dad.
Mr. Dulan.
Wow, sounds like quite a man, Lyle.
He was great.
My dad was Adolf Dulan. We lost him in 2018. He was born in a log cabin that was built by my great-grandfather in a small town in Oklahoma City called Luther. Actually, the log cabin was a few miles outside of Luther. So he was born literally in the country, where he was raised on a farm. They had an outhouse. They raised hogs, chickens, cows, and he was the youngest of 4 children. And he was quite younger because the next youngest sibling was 17 years older. And so even though he had 3 other siblings, he actually grew up in the home by himself, because his brothers and sisters left home to go to college or to get married or whatever, while he was still a child. And so for them, he was truly the baby brother, and they always treated him special because of that. But he grew up in Luther, Oklahoma. Went to school. We used to tease him because we used to say that when he went to elementary school and high school, they had all 12 grades in one room, which is not that far from the truth, given that he was born in 1934. But he went to a small school, and the school was actually called the Dulan School. My grandfather drove the school bus. And so he was the valedictorian of his high school class. And again, we used to tease him because we used to say there were only 4 people in the high school in the 12th grade when he graduated, which is not true, but it's not that far from the truth. But he grew up, you know, in the post-Depression era, Oklahoma, you know, in the early 30s and 40s. He later attended Langston University in Oklahoma, and that is where he met my mother. And my mother was only there for 1 year. She was only at Langston for 1 year, so it was a chance meeting because she left Langston and she went to nursing school in Kansas. So it was only a chance meeting that they met because she was only there for 1 year. But nevertheless, he met my mother, Vivian Dulan, at Langston University, and she went to nursing school. And then after they both graduated, they got married and moved to Texas, and where my father was in the Army. And he was in the Army after the he was in the Army when there was no wartime. I can't remember if he was before the Korean War or after the Korean War, but he was there. So he served during the non-wartime years in the U.S. Army. He and my mother got married, and in the 1950s, late 1950s, they moved to Los Angeles. And so they got their start, and they bought a house. They bought a small house, and then they got started. My dad was a very hardworking guy. He was a social worker for the County of Los Angeles, and he was always a people person and always a community person. And I remember when we were children, he would take us over to Watts. He would take us to Watts because Watts was his territory as a social worker. And we would go to the housing projects like Nickerson Gardens and places like that a lot of you never heard of, but we'd go to the housing projects. And he would donate food, and he would talk to the mothers about their children, and he would talk to the children to see how they were doing in school. And, you know, he was just a really caring type of person. And I witnessed all of that. I remember one day he was playing a baseball game on a baseball league out way out in Orange County. And the wives of the players, because it was a men's league, made a bunch of sandwiches for all of the people playing and all of the spectators and everything. And at the end of the game and after everyone finished eating, there were about 200 sandwiches left. And my father said, well, what are you guys going to do with these sandwiches? And he said, well, we're going to toss them. We're going to throw them away. He said, let me have them. And so he took those sandwiches, he put them in the car, and we drove straight to Watts, down to Nickerson Garden projects, and he gave all those sandwiches away to the families in the projects. And I've never forgotten that. So that's kind of how I was raised. Just to fast forward, he was never satisfied with working on a job. And he used to say, you know, you can't get rich in America by working on a job. He saw the way to move the family forward was through business ownership. And so he started dabbling in entrepreneurship. So he opened a merchandise packing company with some guys. He went in partnership, and they had this packing company, and they had a contract with a drugstore here in California called Thrifty Drugstores. And so we would get the product in from China or wherever it was manufactured, and then we would package it and then transport it to the drugstore chain, who would then distribute it to all the different stores and sell it. And that business, you know, I worked in as a child, you know, helping to pack stuff. But, you know, I think they were I don't know exactly what happened, but I think there was something with the partnership and things fell apart. But later he ventured into food, and at one point he owned a Mexican restaurant, he owned an Italian restaurant, he owned hamburger stands, he bought an Orange Julius franchise. All of these businesses failed, by the way. And then eventually he got into soul food, and he opened Aunt Kizzy's Back Porch in Marina Del Rey, California. And the business took off and became very successful. My father always talked to me about business ownership and the fact that most people in the world don't know how to implement and execute. People often talk about what they want to do, but being able to actually implement and execute what you want to do, most people have trouble with doing that. A small percentage of the people in the population have that ability to visualize something and then to make it come to fruition. And so he talked to us about that all the time. And he was just tenacious and never give up. And I remember just so much. So, in closing and wrapping this up, my dad was a great guy. He was very much a family guy. Keeping his family together was, pulling his family together was when he was at his greatest peace and his greatest joy. Be it family dinners, vacations, or whatnot. He just loved having his family around him. And so, he was a great role model for me.
Wow. I want to tell both of you guys, both of you have known Lyle for 40 plus years, and I've known Greg for 50 plus years, and I've learned things about you all and your dads that I never knew.
Absolutely, Greg. That's an amazing story. I had the pleasure of meeting your dad. I didn't know all that history about him. I'm glad I had a chance to share.
That's amazing.
Very powerful.
So my dad, William Rogers, born in 1923, also passed in 2018, was one of 9, or actually 10 siblings who lived. His mother had 16 births, 10 that survived. And he's toward the younger side of that group. He was born into a very successful Florida family. He was born in Bradenton, Florida. My grandfather was arguably one of the most successful African Americans in the state of Florida, in the funeral home business, in the life insurance business, in the hotel business, and a number of other businesses. My grandfather passed fairly early in the early 1950s, so I never had the privilege of meeting him. My dad was coming back, was drafted into the Army for the Second World War, and was the 300th Black Marine in U.S. history. And actually, I get my first name Darswell as a result of the fact that Luther Darswell White saved his life on Saipan. And if there had not been the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, he would have been in the early invasion forces into Japan. So you can call it fortuitous and for arguably me being here. My dad, math major, Bethune-Cookman College is where he graduated from, and decided he wanted to go into medicine. Interestingly enough, he met my mom, Thelma Rogers, very early in life, because his sister, who was a school teacher, was the teacher at this small school in the Old Town, Florida, Dixie County area, where everybody in the school was related. So they met each other, but it didn't really register. It wasn't until they got to prep school, Fessenden Academy, which was one of the 2 places that if you were Black, you could actually get an education through 12th grade. And so that's where they met. So he went on to med school at Meharry, and graduated, and then went on and became a urologist and a surgeon. I appreciate the fact that story is extraordinary for many people. That my grandfather was very successful, and then my father became a surgeon. That's extremely atypical. I understand and appreciate. My dad was a quiet man. His presence in our life, we did not fully appreciate because of just how quiet he was. But what we can look back and attest to the fact is that we never had a concern or a want for a thing. What I can also say is that, notwithstanding the fact that we had certain benefits, we were raised very frugally. Um, there was, I just didn't ask for a lot of stuff. The presumption was is that you don't waste food, you don't waste this. People teach me to this day that if the food is in the refrigerator and it doesn't smell, I'm going to eat it because that's how I was raised. So uh, very, very profoundly frugal, notwithstanding the advantages. And what I really got for him was that, and Lyle said it, he was just always present. He was there all the time. He worked hard. That was his being a provider. I would describe as what he viewed to be his core function. And he took us on vacations every year. And you look back and you appreciate that. And so thank you guys for that kind of initial introduction. What I want to do at this point is ask this question: when I say fatherhood, what does that mean to you personally? Um, and what does it mean to you personally? And in your mind, how does that show up for you as a father? How does that fatherhood show up for you? And I'm going to flip it a little bit this time and ask Greg to go first, and then Lyle. What does fatherhood mean to you?
Well, fatherhood to me uh, means pure joy. Um, One of the best experiences that I have now and have ever had has been that of being a dad, of being a father. And fatherhood can extend beyond your genetic children. Um, uh, I'm in the restaurant business and I work with a lot of young people, and I find myself doing a lot of fathering. And so, because a lot of the young people that work for me don't know their father or don't, and so fatherhood also means guidance, mentorship, uh, being a leader, uh, leading by example, um, being a role model, teaching, a lot of those different things that I didn't expect to be doing. And so fatherhood is leadership, fatherhood is mentoring, fatherhood is supporting, uh, providing. Fatherhood is being able to provide, and it's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful thing to be a father. It's just a wonderful thing.
Lyle, same question.
For me, fatherhood, thank you, Greg. That's a wonderful answer. For me, fatherhood is the ultimate expression of who I am as a man, about who I am as a human being. It changed my life so profoundly and continues to. I think because of the father I had, and who didn't have a lot of examples of how he should do it, I was committed to being a good father to my kids. I have twins, Adia and Jason. I won't mention them a lot because they mean so much to me. But it was for the first time in my life when I had to truly sacrifice for two other human beings, who I was responsible for. So that sense of sort of extending my life or living beyond myself, my own, selfish needs and wants, and providing for two little people who had come into the world, and still raising them and having a relationship with them to this point, in my life, is everything to me. It's, I've actually struggled a little bit since they've become grown, because I think I had defined myself as a father first and foremost, and didn't, have been trying to figure out who I am or what my responsibility is now. I still have a very close relationship with them. But to me, fatherhood was the most important. Being a father to Adia and Jason is the most important thing I have ever done and may ever do in my lifetime. raising them to become responsible, happy adults who are living their own lives on their own terms was something that I always talked about with them, to them, and still we continue that conversation. And I'm gonna say one last, well, a couple of things. I always wanted to have the kind of relationship with my twins that I had with my dad, and it was really transformational and an evolution of our relationship, where he was always my dad and I always, treated him with the respect he deserved. But he became my friend in his later years. We really became best friends. And I think that's kind of what's going on with Adia and Jason. And that was one of the things that I always said I wanted to do. I wanted to be friends with them, that yes, I'm still dad, but I also wanted to have the kind of relationship with me where they could come and we could speak as human beings. And we're very, sometimes disturbingly honest and candid with each other. And I think that shows up in unusual ways, but it's exactly what I wanted. But again, the ultimate expression of my manhood is being a father. And I just want to echo what the sentiment that Greg shared with us a moment ago about being a father to so many other people, even though that you might not be their biological parent. And I just think that Greg has done an amazing job of that, and something that I've also aspired to do in my life. And Greg has been an inspiration for that in many ways. So thank you for saying that, Greg.
Awesome. We're here talking to Lyle Harris and Greg Dulan. These are just two very close friends of mine. I wanted to, for this Father's Day, have a kind of a special Grow Your Business Today program, and just kind of set aside the notion of business and just talk about fatherhood. Let me share, my thoughts. Fatherhood for me, first and foremost, meant showing up and being there, being present, having an impact. I made a fundamental decision very early to bring to my son a sense of worth in himself. When I was growing up, I don't think my parents understood, matter of fact, I'm sure they didn't, the notion of confidence as being something that can be developed. My mom had a very simple perspective, which my dad embraced, which is that if your clothes are clean and your hair is neat, and you are well behaved, you're as good as anybody. It was just that simple. There was not a whole lot of additional elements that were necessary. You do the right thing, and therefore you'll be fine. And so, from my perspective as a father, my son Randy Rogers, thank you for having uh, you know mentioned the name of your children, Lyle. Um, you know, I kind of made that decision that I thought that him walking away or developing a good sense of himself was really important, and an important role for me to bring to him as a father figure. I also have spent and poured a lot into other young people. I have actually been designated 4 mentees in my life, aside from just general stuff. And it was so interesting because when this process began, there's actually one, Sam, we have not talked in the last couple of years, and I could not find his phone number today, that I wanted to do. And I've got a couple of godsons that I've thought about and need to connect with it over the next week leading into Father's Day. So it's always been about, for me, showing up as number one. What I want to do here is to take a quick break and come back and continue this conversation with Mr. Greg Dulan and Lyle Harris. We'll be right back. And welcome back to the second and a half hour and the special edition of the Grow Your Business Today program. It's the Father's Day edition. And what I have done is invited 2 of my close friends to join me to talk about fatherhood. We have talked about our fathers. We've talked about the various notions of being a father. And my friends are Mr. Lyle Harris. He's a senior director for the transit agency in Atlanta, Marta. And Mr. Greg Dulan, he's CEO and owner of Dulan's on Crenshaw, and also co-owner of Hotville Chicken and Dulan Soul Food Kitchen. And so, guys, I've known you guys 40 or 50, 60 years, 40, 50 years at any rate. And you all are telling me some wonderful stories that I have just never heard. And what I want to do at this point is to maybe delve a little bit more into the question of being a father. And so I want to talk a little bit about the relationship you have with your kids. When you think about your years of being a father, what are some of the key memories? And some of those you guys have shared. What are some of the challenges, the surprises, insights, fears, of just the whole dynamic, of being a father? And Lyle, why don't I start with you and allow you to share some insights there?
Thank you, Darwin. That's a lot. I had again twins who were Geminis, and they were as different as night and day. One is really outgoing and just the life of the party, very gregarious, and the other one is more inward looking and soulful and spiritual. So I had very, very different experiences with both of them, both of which tested my ability to be a father and to be a good father to both of them, because I was looking at something I had written to my father years and years ago for Father's Day, maybe 15, 20 years ago. And I said, you don't get a manual that explains to you how to be a parent, how to be a dad. So I was, it's one of those things where you're kind of learning on the job. And again, for my daughter who, suffers, and I hope she doesn't mind me saying this, I don't think she would. She's dealt with depression for most of her life. I had a hard time understanding the dynamics of what that meant and how that was unfolding and how that was affecting her life. So I'm still learning to this day how to relate to her in a way that's helpful and supportive and loving. And that's been a challenge for me. So that was one of the things that, that was most uplifting about being a dad, is that it forces you to learn things that you didn't otherwise know, and has helped me develop skills in terms of being compassionate and empathetic in ways that I certainly wasn't when I was, before I was her dad. Jason, on the other hand, was my son, was always like I said, the outgoing one, who I was always trying to rein him in and trying to keep him from going too far. But he at one point decided that instead of going to school, where I had already taken out a rather substantial loan for him to go to school, he decided he wanted to pursue his lifelong teenage interest in being in rap music. And at one point, I had actually got him into school and hooked him up with a job opportunity that would have been, great benefits, great pay, and all that. And he decided in the last year of this 2-year, well, not even 2 years, it was just a 1-year program, he decided he wanted to instead pursue his musical career and go off and become a hip hop artist. And he actually did that against my my objections, and I made that clear to him. And we had a very difficult relationship. At one point, we didn't even speak for about a year. I didn't even know where he was when he was pursuing his musical interests. But he decided that he wanted to go and do that, and he did it. And to this day, we've since gotten as close as I can imagine. We're really, really close and talk a lot. He pursued his rap career, and he's still in the game today. He's still performing, he's still writing, he's still an artist, and he's one of the happiest people I know. So it was, again, very, very different relationships with him, and I had to learn to be a better person, a better man than I was if I had never been their dad in the first place. It just sort of really tested and challenged me to learn some things about myself, and to more importantly, as their dad, to learn some things about them that I would not have otherwise understood.
Thank you for sharing. It's it's definitely an up and down relationship with young people,
Yeah.
and I certainly had it up and down as a young person, and so I relate. So Greg, share your perspective on what challenges, what are your main memories, the surprises, insights, fears, thoughts of just having been a father. What's that been like for you?
Well, the biggest surprise is when I had my first child, Brett. Um, you know, Nobody warned me about how exhausted I would be all the time. The lack of sleep. I mean, no sleep, no sleep, and getting up in the middle of the night, and we were using formula, and making the formula and stuff like that. And that was my initial introduction into fatherhood, and it was quite a shock. But my promise to my children when they were babies, Brett and Alexis, was that I wasn't going to miss a minute of them growing up, and I poured all that I had into raising my children. I was there. I was the parent who drove them to and from school. I was coaching. I coached their sports teams. I made every Christmas program. You know, we vacationed as a family. I made sure that I was there. I moved heaven and earth to make sure I was present and there for everything that they did. I was there. You know, my son had some challenges when he was in kindergarten, and he was at risk of being asked to leave the school. And so the principal, the headmaster said, well, if you want your son to stay in this school, you have to come and sit in class with him every day.
Wow.
So I went to kindergarten with my son, pretty much. And I sat there with him in class for most of the class, and you know, made sure that he behaved, and got a chance to experience that. And it's a memory that I'll never forget. My daughter was different. She was, you know, just a great kid. Didn't need any help. Good student. Made up her bed. You know, just she was easy. You know, and it's funny when you have the second baby. And I'm jumping all over the place, but you don't measure the formula quite as precise as you do the first baby. Maybe the baby cries a little bit longer, you know, but anyway, the kids have both come out on top, and I'm seeing now that the time I put in, the sacrifices I made, are paying off. 2 weeks ago, my son graduated from USC with a master's degree in technology and business. And this is the same young man who I had to, you know, ride during high school to do his homework and turn in his assignments. Yesterday, I went with my son to look at a house that he is getting ready to buy. And the big reveal and thing that I'm excited about is that I'm going to be a grandfather later this year. My daughter is very successful. She's a go-getter, and she is just a wonderful young lady. And this occurred because of the time that both I and their mother put into raising them, and it you know, it's really rewarding to see the work that you put in and the result that you have at the end of the day, when you see your children as adults, as contributing, you know, adults contributing to society, goal-oriented, making progress. There's no better feeling. You know, I was so proud yesterday seeing my son walk through the house with his excitement. I'm going to do this over here, and I'm going to move this, and I'm, you know, just, you know, I just stepped back and I just watched, and I said, "Thank you, Jesus. Thank you. This is where it all comes in. This is what the work that I put in has led to, and it's just it's so, you feel so proud, you just can't. It's just ridiculous, you know."
Awesome. Thank you, Greg and Lyle. Let me share. You know, my son Randy, thinking about growing up, and expectations and concerns and fears. Um, I said a little bit about this earlier, and it really comes back to, I grew up as the kind of scrawny, awkward kid that if it hadn't have been for sports, I feel like I would have gone into oblivion in terms of my personal levels of confidence or whatever. And so I really kind of started in terms of raising a child, and I've only got the one, with the notion that he was going to enter the world believing he was capable and solid. And so I actually put on the wall in his room, and we recited every evening from the time he was about 3 or 4, a simple statement. And it went something along the lines of, "My name is Randy Rogers. I'm an important person." And then it would go on for a period of time. And I also had him memorize, and the two of you all will appreciate this. He can recite Invictus and If. And so in elementary school, he is talking about, "I'm the master of my fate. I'm the captain of my soul," right? Because I just felt that that level of that being affirmed was so, it was something that I know I would have benefited from. And so I did that for him. Like you, Greg, my goal was to not miss anything. I had the good fortune of having a very good job at J.P. Morgan that allowed me the flexibility. And he went to school about 40 blocks from where I was working. So whatever the activity was, if it was a morning activity, a morning program, I would go to the morning activity, hop in a cab, and get to work. If it was a mid-afternoon activity, I could hop in the cab and go down there and return to work. I ended up being assistant basketball on assistant basketball coach. He was a competitive chess player. We traveled the country, and so we had the good fortune of having a lot of time for the two of us to spend together. And today, the restaurant that he and his mother and I, that his mother and I started 2 years ago, he bought that business and has exceeded the work that had been previously done in terms of running it. So, very gratifying, very gratifying. I had one other question, and then we'll have a few minutes perhaps for some free form. Is if there's somebody other than your dad, and I think you guys have kind of both talked about having poured into other young people. But if you want to talk a little bit about a person that was not your dad that really played that role for you, and you want to highlight that person, I want to give you guys, take a minute or two, not too long, if you want to highlight somebody else to share. And Lyle, I'll let you go first.
The person that immediately comes to mind, and I've had a number of men who stepped in, and helped out. My dad was a great man, but he was not very well educated. He didn't have a lot of wherewithal. He didn't, never started his own business. He was a wage earner for most of his life. But I had a lot of great, people, men in my life, African American men who stepped in. And one of the ones that I think of most vividly and fondly is a gentleman named Samuel F. Yet, who was a professor of journalism at Howard University. And Darswell, I don't think you mentioned this, but the three of us are all members of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated Beta Chapter. And he was also an Alpha Phi Alpha brother who sort of took me under his wing when I first started my initial career. For most of my life, actually about 25, 30 years, I was a journalist. And Professor Yet was my journalism 1 and 2 professor, and he just molded me and shaped me and guided me in terms of being a great journalist, which I'd like to believe I was, and he was indeed that. He wrote a game-changing book about the Vietnam War, the name of which, of course, I can't remember because I'm 62. But he was just a great man, and he was a great father figure to me. Again, molded me and shaped me as a journalist, and did that for so many other Black journalists at Howard University. So I want to also salute him and honor him as well, Samuel F. Yet, forever.
And I remember Professor Yet. I don't remember why or what the context is, but that's a name that I absolutely remember from my time on campus. Thank you for that. Greg, your turn.
Well, I think if I'm honest, the person who just really had the most impact on me was my father, obviously, but also my two grandfathers. My mother's father, Hosea McCowan, Reverend Hosea McCowan, and that's Hosea, was a Baptist minister. Went to Bishop College in Dallas, Texas, to get his degree, and he always talked to me and my siblings about the Lord, about faith, and he just, there's so many memories in my mind about things he taught us and talked to us about, about doing right and being honest and things like that. Things I've just never forgotten. He was a good man. He was a preacher's preacher, and got a chance to see him preach, and I can still envision him, in the pulpit right now, just preaching a wonderful sermon. The other would be my father's father, Silas Dulan, who was born in 1889 and was raised on the farm, the same farm my father was raised on. And he was just, just a hustler, just a tenacious individual. He ran a farm. He had a farm that he ran, but he also drove the school bus in Luther, and so all the families in the neighborhood knew Mr. Dulan. And it strikes me because when I was with him as a child, everywhere he went, everybody said, "Hello, Mr. Dulan, Mr. Dulan, Mr. Dulan." And now, for me as an adult, whenever I'm out and about in the city, and especially when I go to the bank or something like that, people are referring to me as Mr. Dulan. "Hi, Mr. Dulan. How are you today, Mr. Dulan?" So the same way my grandfather was greeted, that I witnessed as a child, I'm now experiencing as an adult. And so those two gentlemen, my two grandfathers, would probably be the people that I would mention.
Awesome. Thank you for both those stories. Mine is, as a person that both of you guys know pretty well, and let me preface by saying that I've had some amazing uncles in my life. I knew all my dad's brothers. I knew all my mom's brothers, but one truly sticks out for me, and that is my Uncle Charles Clark, who has passed, but at the time that I chose to go to Howard University, I actually ended up at Howard because of a suggestion that he made to my mom that I should attend, and I agreed to go. And he lived in Maryland. He was an engineer for the Navy, and he and my Aunt Corolla are hands down the warmest two people I can think of. When they open their house to you, you know that you are in an environment where love and security and an appreciation are just what they were about. I mean, they are heaven sent as two people. And I won't go into the details, but we were.
You're making me cry.
Can we tell that story, Darzul, with Big Brother Greg Dulan
I
on the line?
love going to their house.
You feel free to tell it, Lyle. I can't.
No. It's just where our line took refuge when we were trying to escape the Big Brothers who were pledging us in 1980. And I had never met Darzul's family, but he's absolutely right. They were the two most welcoming people I had ever met in my life, and they just took us in, all 10 of us at the time. So they'll always be part of my fondest memories of pledging at Howard.
And I'm talking 10 incredibly funky guys, and they just took our clothes and washed them, and at no point in time did they ever come back and question anything about what I did or what we did. I didn't hesitate to go, and I never heard anything about it. So there's zero chance I can imagine my mother having tolerated such a thing. So let me just be clear. That just remarkable. So we've got, let me just, let me offer up a simple summary, 60 seconds, 90 seconds of summary. Greg, I'll let you go first, of just, Father's Day, just the conversation we've had. I truly appreciate it, and it's been a blessing to me just hanging out with you guys.
Well, in my profession as a restaurant owner, I hire a lot of young people. And I can tell you that there is a crisis in the sense that there's so many young people who don't have their fathers in their lives. And they are really struggling to find a direction. And they are yearning for that relationship with a man who they can talk to about things and who they can ask advice about. They don't have that. A lot of people just don't have that. And it wasn't until I got in the restaurant business that I realized how tough it really is out there. How tough it is for a lot of young people and a lot of kids out there. So I find myself mentoring a lot of young men, a lot of young women, and it's challenging. It's heartwarming, but there's just a tremendous need for that type of thing, and so I think when we extend ourselves like that, I think we're doing a societal good, especially if we can help to make a difference in a young person's life in a positive way.
And Lyle?
Thank you, Greg. That was great. I want to read a little something, because one of the things that, in honoring and saluting my dad, one of the things he taught me, and part of even this conversation we're having here today, is that I didn't have a brother. I didn't have a big brother or anything like that, but I grew up watching my father and how he related to other men, especially other Black men. And I wrote him a letter again. I think I mentioned at the beginning of this interview that I had written him this letter. This was at least 15 years ago. And I was explaining to him why he was such an important part of my life. And if you can just give me the great start, well, I'd like to read a little bit of it.
Yes, please.
Just a couple sentences. It said, "Dad, you introduced me to the camaraderie of men, that often misunderstood landscape of having kinship with where how much money you make or what kind of car you drive or where you live doesn't count for much, not with your friends. Because you had Maxie and Howie and Alvin and Jono and Sonny, I learned how to have friends like Eric and Bobby and Junior and Darswell and Mike and Andy and Charlie and Paulie and Brian and Drew and Joseph, all these friends that are still part of my life. Some of my friends you know, some you don't, but every one of them knows about you and knows that you've been an enduring friend and loving father to me. And that's why I loved him so much, is that he taught me how to be friends with other men and how to have the kind of relationships, and even being on the point of tears and being sympathetic and empathetic and learning how to love people genuinely and deeply, even though he didn't know, no one ever taught him how to do that. So I just want to say that that's one of the greatest gifts my father ever gave me. And I just want to say thank you to him for that as well.
Wow.
Yeah, that's what, when you send your son to journalism school, you're going to get
I think it's obvious I've been fighting back some tears. When I thought to do this, I felt it would be a blessing.
It has been, Dars. Thank you for doing this, man.
Yeah, thank you for allowing me to reminisce. I miss my dad.
Yeah.
Terribly. You guys all knew him. And, I worshiped the ground he walked on. Up until the very end, I worshiped the ground he walked on. So thank you for inviting me to do this. I really appreciate it.
Well, I can't even get the rest of my thoughts out. So I'm going to say to the audience, I hope this has been a blessing. That was the intention. And we hope everybody has an outstanding Father's Day weekend. I want to thank Greg Dulan and Lyle Harris. And that'll be the end of the program. Thank you very much for listening. You listen to WID Wake Up.
Thanks, Dara.